Hey, this week on the show, we talk about the Raspberry Pi and Pi alternatives. We talk about some OSs like Zorin and Red Hat. Then there is Torvalds weighing in on the rather nasty Rust versus C debate. And oh yeah, the real-time patch has finally landed. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 170, recorded Saturday, September 21st. Always 10 years away. Hey folks, it is Saturday, and you know what that means. It's time to get geeky over Linux and open source and all kinds of fun things. You know, there's no telling what we'll get into here. During the pre-show, we were talking about which is better, Star Trek versus Star Wars, and we are not going to comment on that on the air because that's a good way to start a holy war and get ourselves into trouble. It is not just me, of course. We've got Ken, we've got David, and we've got Rob, and we are here to talk Linux. And
not Doctor Who.
Not Doctor Who. Ooh, we're going to let Rob get started.
And the answer to the question was Stargate.
We're going to get angry letters now. Rob, stop talking about sci-fi and let's talk about the Raspberry Pi alternative. Which one are we talking about this week?
So here on the Untitled Linux Show, we are excited for our ARM feature and love the single board systems on a chip, SoCs, like the Raspberry Pi. And even though, I believe ARM may be our future, sometimes it doesn't quite work out for projects today that need more power, or the software you want to run isn't available for ARM. Or maybe you want to be able to boot it from the free version of iVentoy. I've got just a thing for you for your next project, and it's called Radxa X4, spelled Radxa. I don't know if that's really how you pronounce it, but I'm going to be calling it Radxa because I don't know how else you would say that. So the Radxa is a single board computer, just like the Raspberry Pi, but instead of ARM, it is powered by an Intel N100 CPU with an Intel UHD graphics, providing more power than the Raspberry Pi 5. Greater software compatibility at the cost of running a little bit hotter under load and more power consumption. The price is comparable to the Pi 5 at a base price of $60, 60 US dollars, and available with a 4, 8, or 12 gigabit model was just announced. The CPU is a quad-core max turbo frequency of 3.4 gigahertz. The UHD graphics supports DirectX 12.1, OpenGL 4.6, OpenCL 3.0, Intel QuickSync, and H.264/5 and AV1 decoding. A 40-pin GPIO header, mostly compatible with the Pi's GPIO. Dual micro HDMI 2.0 ports, so you can have two monitors on it. 3 USB 3 ports, 1 USB 2 port, an Ethernet port, onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and the courage to include a 3.5 millimeter audio combo jack. There is no SD card slot on it like the Raspberry Pi, but SD cards suck. Instead, there's an M.2 PCIe 3 slot for M.2 SSD. And you can also optionally get eMMC storage pre-soldered for just $9 more. There's a few different storage size options. The base model does not have eMMC on it. Unfortunately, like the Pi, this seems like it might be a little difficult to get your hands on, though a couple of models appear to be available at Erase.tech. And right before the show, I stumbled upon another new device powered with a similar hardware that I may talk about next week on our apparently the new hardware showcase corner or as I like to call it, things Jonathan should buy.
My wife complains about you every time she does the bills. Like, what is this $135? Rob!
So you moved from distro hopping to hardware buying.
Yeah, flavor of the week, I guess.
Yeah.
I have at least one more thing. I mean, that I go where the good stuff is, and right now it's just all kinds of interesting hardware coming out.
So I've got to ask, how long does this thing work? How many microseconds will it not burn itself out for if you don't put a heatsink on it?
They do recommend a heatsink, and they do have a heatsink available for $15.
Recommend heatsink.
Yeah, they don't recommend not using one. But $15 for the heatsink for their provided one or their available one. Yeah.
Yeah. I sort of expect this thing to burst into flames without.
They might as well just add an extra $15 to the price and include the heatsink.
Yeah.
I mean, this is for hobbyists. You may want to make your own. Who knows what you want to do? It's a single board computer. You might want to make it water cooled.
You do want to make a more powerful heatsink than they're offering. And fan.
I mean, it doesn't look too terrible, but I can't imagine an x86 machine not running hot, dangerously hot without a heatsink. It's one of the things that they managed to do on the Raspberry Pi. Like, yes, they'll get hot, but they can run safely without any sort of heatsink on them and still continue to run without crashing. Like, they're really impressive. And I don't see an x86 doing that, really.
Yeah, well, the piece of hardware I might talk about next week, I'm kind of wondering where the heatsink fits into that. Because apparently it's the same N100 Intel and all that stuff.
According to Joey Snedden's article, it starts throttling at about 90 degrees centigrade.
Yeah, which is common for
Intel.
That's pretty hot. Oh,
I mean, actually, I want to say Intel throttles around 80 normally. I can't remember. It depends on the.
It depends upon the chip and what all it's doing. Yeah, some of them will handily hit 100 plus C. So we're talking Raspberry Pi alternatives. Let's talk for a minute about the OG, the newest kid on the block by the OG, I suppose. We, of course, have the Raspberry Pi 5, and something that people have been sort of eagerly anticipating is all of the other Raspberry Pi 5 things that hopefully, surely, are coming. And we got a bit of a clue this week about the Raspberry Pi CM5. That's the Compute Module 5. That is... Oh, let's see. Do I have one here? I usually have one here. I'm sure there is one somewhere on the desk. Maybe mine are all in use. Anyway,
under the keyboard?
The little tiny... No, I removed the keyboard. The little tiny compute module that you could plug into other boards. It is super useful for things like... a lot of interesting uses. People have made router boards that you can plug them into. Then you've got things like the Turing Pi, where you can put several of them on a single board. Some really interesting things that the compute module does. And of course, people are looking for that. And of course, the Pi 500 we sort of expect to come eventually. But we got a clue in Ubuntu, and this is actually Ubuntu 24.10 Canonical. Has a little ticket in there about, in order to provide support for the forthcoming CM5, we should incorporate all possible boot fixes for the CM5 into the Oracular release, which apparently Ubuntu 24.10 is Oracular Oriole. They named it. I didn't. Anyway, but this is a clue, and it sort of makes me think that the people from Raspberry Pi and the people from Ubuntu talk. Like, their people called their people, and there was a conversation about when this is going to come out. And here are the things that you should do to make sure that it's going to work once it comes out. So soon. All that to say, I expect the CM5 to come soon, and then on our wish list we are going to have, of course, the Pi 500, and I tell you something else from Raspberry Pi that I would really like to see. Eben, if you're watching, I would love to see the RP1 on an X4 PCI Express card that we could plug into a desktop. That would be killer. That would be slick. Give us the 40-pin GPIO on the back of a desktop. Man, that would be fun. But anyway, the CM5, it is coming. It is coming soon.
So with your request, plugging that into a PCI slot, would that just be to get the GPIO, or is there? You would get GPIO, you would get UART, you would get SPI, which GPIO and SPI is really interesting to me because I work with Meshtastic, and so then you can hang like a LoRa radio off of it and run Meshtastic right on Linux. I do a lot of work with that. Like I am the Linux guy in the Meshtastic community. So that's one of the things I would love to have. But like there's a bunch of things that you can do right now with the Raspberry Pi that's genuinely hard to do on a desktop. And it would just be really interesting to be able to put all those ports on a desktop. One of the other things that I have personally asked Eben for, and he responded relatively positively to this, is on the Pi 400. Mine is a little precarious right now. I can't just grab it. But like on the, you type on one side, on the other side of it, we're like, can you put like Visa mounts on the other side so that we can just like put it wherever we want it? And it's like, I'll have to look at how much that's going to cost. We're like, oh, it would be so cool. So if we get Visa mounts on a Pi 400 or on a Pi 500, you're welcome.
Now, the question I got is, I see that according to Joey Snedden's article, he did an update saying that they have come out with a 12 gigabyte version of that Pi alternative. Think Raspberry Pi might do something like that?
I don't know if we'll ever see a 12 gig. I think for the guys at Pi, it would probably make more sense to try to do a 16. But that's going to be just a question of, can they get the right physically sized RAM chips to be able to do it on their boards? Will the CPU they have support it? That might be like a Pi 6 sort of thing. I don't know if that's going to come for the 5, but I don't know.
But definitely by Pi 10.
I mean, by that point, 16 gigs is not going to be enough for anybody.
They totally missed out when they were doing the Pi 3. They could have had the Pi 3.14.
I'm sure somebody made that joke internally somewhere. I was going to see what they really should have done is the successor to the Pi 3, rather than calling it the Pi 4, it should have been the Pi 3.1. And the one after that would be the Pi 3.14. Sure. That would have been the way to do it. All right.
What would be after the 3.14?
3.141.
Yeah, just go all the way down the string.
Yeah. 3.141529, something like that. That's all I know.
And the string goes forever. So.
It goes forever. No stop, no breaks on this train. All right, David, save us from the unending digits of pi with WireGuard. What's new in WireGuard?
Nothing, and that's a good thing. So the reason why I'm bringing WireGuard is this is the first show I've been on. So it's been a couple weeks, but my last show, we kept confusing Wireshark and WireGuard, and I promised next week, so it's my next week, not the show's next week, to talk about WireGuard. So when I went looking for a WireGuard news article, Google's news aggregator, the last article mentioning WireGuard was in April. So then I just went over to the CVS site and looked just to see if there were any issues. And the last real one was from 2023. And for something that is security oriented and all about securing your packets, that is a very good thing. So I linked to WireGuard's site itself because I wanted to bring out a couple of things that they list on their site. First, it is extremely small. They mention it has a minimal attack surface, but one of the things that I think is very interesting about it is specifically meant to be comprehensively reviewable by single individuals. And that is compared to the Swan IPsec or the OpenVPN OpenSSL stacks, which are behemoths, and auditing even by a team of security experts is overwhelming task with both of those. And I think the fact that there are no current CVEs for WireGuard, and there haven't been that many when I looked back at the history, speaks to just how successful they've been in that. It's getting picked up by everything. If you do any networking stuff, Ubiquity has it built into their products now. The only thing that I'm not really seeing, which I would love to see, is WireGuard start to get more uptake at the enterprise level. I'm not sure about Palo Alto, but I know Fortinet does not support it yet, and I don't think Cisco does either. But I really think that it is the future of VPN technology and is a strong contender to replace the ubiquity of IPsec. So anyway, if you're looking for VPN, you should be looking at WireGuard.
Is IPsec really the ubiquitous solution anymore?
It is at the enterprise level.
Really?
Because that's the common denominator. Like if you want to connect Fortinet to Cisco, it's IPsec. You want to go in between vendors, they may have their own proprietary stuff internally, but anything that's inter-vendor is IPsec.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
TP with IPsec encryption.
I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything other than Ubiquity with WireGuard either.
Well, you can get it with like pfSense and
well, sure, of course you can.
The other ones. But as far as something you can, I think it also may be in some of the lower end home router stuff. They're starting ones where you find like OpenVPN. I think like Netgear and D-Link and stuff might have little servers built into them. But anything at the enterprise level.
Yeah, I'm really talking about your comment on the enterprise. I haven't used any home routers for a few years, so I'm a little out of the loop there.
Interestingly, WireGuard you can implement in fewer bytes than OpenVPN.
Yes,
I remember working with the OpenWRT routers, the ones where we would squeeze them into 4 megs of flash. You could just barely get WireGuard in there, but there was just no way for OpenVPN to get in there. Just would not build. Took too many bytes to do the full SSL stack.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, I was just reminding myself what all goes into the WireGuard encryption, and I was a little surprised to see X25519 in there, which is built on elliptic curves. And that's interesting because that's not considered post-quantum secure. And so with WireGuard, if post-quantum security is something that you care about, you've actually got to also use a pre-shared key, which, of course, there is no quantum shortcuts for PSKs. So just a little tidbit there. Not that anybody here actually cares about post-quantum security, because that's one of those things. It's like forever 10 years away. It's like nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion and usable quantum computers will arrive at the same time, and it's always going to be 10 years away.
One of the success of one of those will trigger the other one. We just don't know which one will come first.
Well, the quantum computing will come first, and then that'll give them the power to figure out fusion.
Either that or fusion will come first, which will give you the power to run the quantum computer.
I guess that.
I think that's the joke, Rob. I think that's the joke.
It's the modern equivalent to Schrodinger's cat. Ken, now save us from this conversation.
Indeed.
Well, in that case, I guess I should tell you about what Paul Krill, Cynthia Kumar, Palami, also known as SKT, wrote about this week. They wrote about Amazon Web Service transferring its open source fork of Elasticsearch and Kibana, what they called the Open Search Project, to the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation has launched the Open Search Software Foundation to support the project and its search and analytics software. The Open Search Software Foundation will work with community maintainers and developers and founding member organizations to support the project and its search and analytics software. The Open Search Software Foundation will work with community maintainers. Sorry about that. Now, OpenSearch is used by developers around the world to build search, analytics, observability, and vector database applications to the tune of more than 700 million downloads. Now, Nandini Ramini, Vice President of Search and Cloud Operations at AWS, said in a published statement, by transferring OpenSearch to the Linux Foundation, we are setting the project and its community up for its next stage of growth. With vendor-neutral governance that invites greater collaboration along with programming and operational resources to further nurture the community, we look forward to working collaboratively with this new foundation to ensure everyone can continue to benefit from OpenSearch. Now, you've got to ask yourself, why did OpenSearch join with the Linux Foundation?
Yes, why?
The decision to move OpenSearch to the Linux Foundation was driven by a desire for more openness and community involvement. While AWS has been a key player in the project's early success, there was a recognition that a vendor-neutral foundation would encourage even more participation. The Linux Foundation, known for successfully nurturing projects like Linux and Kubernetes, was seen as the perfect place to help OpenSearch grow. This transition brings several benefits, including enhanced collaboration, strong governance, and probably most important, access to resources. The OpenSearch community is excited about this transition, with many members and stakeholders pledging their support, including, of course, AWS. And y'all have probably heard of SAP, Uber, and Avon. Now, SK also lists in his article many prominent members who extended their support. And Paul writes, a technical steering committee will oversee it. As always, I recommend reading Paul and SK's respective articles for more details and their opinions on where this will take OpenSearch.
Yeah, so this is OpenSearch it's a response to back in like 2021 when Elasticsearch and Kibana moved from an open source license to a source available license. The server side public license and the Elastic license, that's what they call them. But they moved away from open source, and they did it because they felt like Amazon was eating into their profits. Right. This was one of the first databases that had this problem, and that their solution was to move away from open source. And it's interesting that Amazon was kind of the vendor that kept it open. But it's
was it eating into their profits, or was it just getting a lot of profit out of their software without any kind of contribution back to it?
Well, what was happening is the developers, the people that ran Elasticsearch and Kibana, they made their money by hosting it. And then Amazon came along and said, "Oh, that's a nice open source project you've got there. We could host it too." And it makes you wonder whether simply hosting your own software is the best business model when you're doing open source software as a service.
Only if you've got the money to maintain a data center.
I think it's only if you don't get too big to where Amazon or somebody comes along and says, "Hey, we could do that."
I think mainly the main thing you have to ask yourself there is what value is it in having us host this, and could someone like Amazon come along and provide the same value for cheaper? And if the answer to that is yes, then maybe you really need to rethink your business strategy there.
Yeah, I think
with providing service and support.
Mm-hmm. What's it, David?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, you really focus on your expertise, and your expertise isn't hosting. Your expertise is understanding how this solution works, whatever that is, whether you're talking about OpenSearch or one of the other products. And so you let the guys that are experts at hosting host, and you focus on your expertise being your value add.
I say diversify.
Do both?
Host it, support it. And then if they eat your lunch in one section, you still got the other. And
yeah, that's fair.
And with it going to open source like this means you're not tied to just one cloud provider either.
Yeah, if you really wanted to, you could go host it on Azure if you really wanted to.
Or Google Cloud.
And speaking of multiple cloud providers, AWS released an article recently, or a news release, or Amazon did, that they're seeing their biggest competition being on-prem. People are coming back out of the cloud because of the costs associated with it. So you can host open source locally if you need to.
It's hilarious.
Open search, sorry.
It is hilarious to me that on-prem is the new hotness, right? That's the new big thing. Have your own servers.
What happened was cloud blew up during COVID, and then after people started coming back to the office, the bean counters realized how much cloud cost.
Yeah.
Especially when you're paying for a physical location also.
Yeah, I think some people got surprised with some $10,000 plus a month cloud bills. They went, man, we could buy a lot of servers for that.
Buy a lot of drives with that.
Yeah, that too. All right, Rob, let's talk about Microsoft and DirectX and the weird things that they're doing.
Let's do that. But first, I'm going to answer a quick question from YouTube from Chris R. He asks, "Wonder if Linux can be installed on a Chromebook?" And I want to say, absolutely, yes, it can. Sometimes there's hoops you have to jump around, but I have installed it on one of my Chromebooks.
I mean, technically speaking, Linux is already installed on Chromebooks.
Technically, Chrome OS is a Linux distribution, but you can install any other Linux distribution on there as well.
Indeed.
So
and you can change from their default distribution that they've got to another.
Sometimes you got to jump through the hoops to do the unlocking thing first.
Yeah, there are hoops. So this week in Microsoft, news this week may make games developed for Windows a little more easier to run on Linux. At least that is what much of the community is speculating that this story is about. Microsoft announced today that DirectX will be adopting SPIR-V, that's SPIR-V, as the interchange format of the future. SPIR-V is a cross-API intermediate language for parallel compute and graphics from the Kronos group. So according to the Kronos site, using SPIR-V means that kernel source code no longer has to be directly exposed. Kernel load times can be accelerated, and developers can choose the use of common language front-end compiler, improving kernel reliability and portability across multiple hardware implementations. This, along with the recent news that I don't think we ever talked about, but recently there was also news that Microsoft would be moving forward with plans to move security out of the Linux kernel. And much of the discussion about that was that anti-cheat for games would no longer have access to the kernel. It would be somehow more at the user land level, which often has been an excuse for a lot of games to come to Linux. They said, well, anti-cheat can't come because it needs that kernel access. So that also is like another excuse chopped away potentially once they get that far for the games to work on Linux. And to expand on that, Microsoft moving things out of the kernel, these two things we've talked about so far, it's not for the benefit of us. It all comes after the CrowdStrike outage and how that security software was tied in a little too deeply into the kernel that it was able to crash. Mm-hmm. Lots of Windows. But the effect may still help us over at Linux, over in the Linux world with gaming. So with DirectX supporting a more cross-platform API, it may make games easier to port or run on Linux through Wine, Proton. Other games say they can't come to Linux because of that kernel level, and that's another obstacle removed, as I kind of pointed out already. In other news, just today on Phoronix, the SDL abstraction layer commonly used by cross-platform games now prefers using Vulkan on Windows as its ideal graphics API. And Vulkan being cross-platform, it just seems like all the things are lining up to continually improve gaming on Linux. Valve's been really making a push over the last few years, and now Microsoft is making a push.
Yeah, so these things, well, there's several directions to go here, but these will make WSL better, right? It'll make WSL easier for Microsoft to keep up with, and it'll give them the ability to do better acceleration inside of WSL. So that's one thing. Just like that's out there. That's one of the things that they're thinking of. I would love to see the link to that post about security coming out of the kernel, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, that was just something I recalled, and yeah, I'll find a link. I looked it up to make sure, but I didn't read the article again.
Yeah, I know they tried to do that back like several years ago, like a decade ago, and they actually got blocked by government regulators who said, well, this will mean that you get to choose the winners and the losers in the antivirus space, and we can't have that.
If I recall, this is a vague memory, but it's like an API that's going to be more outside, so it's not going to be like tied in as tight.
Is it similar to the API for the virus detecting software?
Well, yeah, that's really.
I think that is what it is. Yeah,
the same tie-in. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see games in particular get their sticky fingers out of the Windows kernel. I think that's always been a terrible idea. And I think Microsoft knows that that's a terrible idea, and they're not real happy about it either. Right? Because like the engineers at Microsoft, they are reasonable guys too, and they realize that this is a knucklehead thing for games to be doing, to have kernel drivers for anti-cheat. It's just like, from any way that you look at it, it's a terrible idea. And it would make things so much easier to do inside of Wine and Proton. So I hope it happens. I hope Microsoft finally is able to put the kibosh on the dumb kernel driver things. Once upon a time in Windows land, that's how you did printers. All printer drivers were kernel drivers. This is how plugging in a scanner can BSOD your Windows machine live in front of people, as Bill Gates found out. That's how that happened.
Scanner, printer.
Yes. Yes.
An attachment to go to a projector.
Yep. Pretty much anything. If it's a kernel driver, it can break your machine. All right. Let's talk about the other kernel that's got things going on. David. Colonel Sanders, yes. No, Rust in the kernel, and how things have gotten a bit nasty. Maybe another holy war is kicking off, eh?
So Torvalds is, I don't know. He's been around for a while. He's always been known for his very interesting press interactions. However, he seems like he might be becoming a bit of the older statesman when it comes to Linux. So I have a link to a Register article with the headline, Torvalds weighs in on nasty Rust versus C for Linux debate. Gotta love the Register for their headlines. But there were a couple of things that I thought were quite interesting snippets from his discussion, and talking specifically about Rust in the kernel. First, he said that the contention between Rust and C reminds him of when he was young and people were arguing about VI versus Emacs, to which the presenter interjected, they still are, as we know on this show and others. Which, if that's the comparison, that doesn't bode well for Rust and C. But he also said, it has taken almost religious overtones. And that's something, when you're doing, especially with open source and everything, technical debate is always positive. When you start moving to a camp simply because of your belief, then that's when things are a little bit get a little bit rusty. But he talks about the fact that there are people who just don't like the notion of Rust and having Rust encroach on their areas. But another thing that I thought was really interesting, and this kind of shows his perspective and the kernel perspective, because we talk often about how quickly the kernel's releasing new versions and everything, and they move quickly on their release cycle, relatively consistently and quickly, but they take a very long view of development. And we've got a discussion about real-time Linux that'll kind of touch on that long view. But this is what I thought was really interesting about that long view. He said, people have been talking about Rust integration being a failure. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, so it's way too early to even say that. So he considers a couple of years way too early. And I think that's impressive just about looking long term at development. I mean, you got people like Google out there that'll kill something after 6 months. And so, when we're looking at the kernel, if you've been doing something a few years, you can't say whether it's a success or failure. But he says even if it were to become a failure at some point, he doesn't think it will, but that's how you learn. So, again, we always fail forward, or ideally we fail forward. So he's not seeing this as, so basically his summary is that he sees the Rust thing as positive overall, even if some of the debates and arguments around it aren't necessarily always positive. The overall process is, and that it's good for the kernel and the kernel development. So anyway, cool article.
Yeah, so this came up a while ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I've been watching ever since then. And there is active Rust code in the kernel. There are drivers written in Rust that are now in the kernel that may run when you plug in certain bits of software. I believe some of the network cards are like purely Rust based in their drivers. So I don't see it going away, right? It's there. And the thing that has gotten to people, though, is you've got maintainers that don't speak Rust and don't really have any interest in learning Rust. But because Rust is sort of being added to things that they work on, there's this, I don't even know what you would call it. I mean, it's sort of a challenge to a maintainer's competence in some ways. That there's now this language that they don't really understand that well, that they feel like they're being forced to come up to speed on, and they've lost some of their expertise in this area. And so, like, I understand why I get why people are passionate about it and why it's sort of a problem. I don't know. I think what Torvalds is doing here with playing the long game is probably the way to go. And let's wait and see.
He does make the point. He said C in the end is a very simple language. It's one of the reasons he enjoys C and why a lot of C programmers enjoy C.
It's true.
He said, and Rust is not.
It's true. It is true.
I've used simpler ones.
Yeah, but you can't do all the things that you can do with C. Like C is the simplest language that can do everything that C can do. All right. Let's see, Ken. Let's talk about Wind River and how this particular Wind River thing came about, right?
In fact, Jonathan, you may even appreciate the irony in Christine Hall's article.
Uh-huh.
She tells us how Red Hat's decision to stop support for CentOS led to Wind River releasing a commercial Linux offering tailored for enterprise use. It's called, and I'm going to just say ELXR Pro, and is based on Debian instead of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's the same software as ELXR, a Linux distribution that Wind River released back in July, based on software initially developed for Starling X. Anybody remember that?
Nope.
That's the company's Kubernetes platform.
Ah.
After Red Hat pulled the plug on CentOS According to Wind River's Chief Technology Officer, Paul Miller, like many companies in the industry, when the CentOS announcement came out, we suddenly had a commercial product that we had a significant problem with. We took the hard look at the market and the open source community, and we decided to move Starling X to a Debian-based operating system. And we did that to really align to a more pure open source methodology so that, frankly, our business couldn't be controlled by another enterprise's desires. Christine points out that the last point is why Wind River isn't falling in line behind the other RHEL clones.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Miller said, we generally feel, after spending a lot of time studying that part of the industry and the open source community, that continuing down any type of RHEL path inevitably ties you to the whims of Red Hat.
Mm-hmm.
The folks at Wind River seem to understand that open source is not some kind of business model and design business plans specifically designed for open source licenses. For example, when the company wanted to release and monetize its own server and edge versions of Linux, it started by releasing the software developed as the community distribution ELXR, giving away any ownership rights Wind River had to the software to the community. What's in it for Wind River, you wonder? The answer is that it offers all sort of paid support for users who won't or need it. If people want a commercially supported version of ELXR that allows them to get security updates and STIGs and the type of things that are important for certain commercial use cases, we'll provide that as a paid service. Paul Miller explained, that's where ELXR Pro comes in. If it is downloaded and being used for free, it's just ELXR. Once support is purposed, it's then ELXR Pro. As Paul Miller puts it, ELXR Pro is really a services and support offering against the ELXR open source project. Now, I'm going to stop here, and I recommend reading Christine's article if you want the rest of the story.
Yeah, so I was listening to this. I was thinking, I know Wind River. That's a name that's familiar to me. What do they do? I went and looked. Wind River, that's VxWorks. That is the company behind VxWorks, which is like one of the other very popular embedded OSs. Even it has even a smaller footprint than Linux does in some cases. So that's interesting to me that the people behind VxWorks are making a Linux distro, and they're calling out Red Hat. That's fun.
Good on them.
It is fun. Yeah.
And not only that, but they're going back to before Red Hat with going with Debian.
Yeah. That's well, I mean, I can't really blame them. Obviously, it's kind of become obvious that Red Hat is not happy. They are not friendly to the idea of RHEL clones. So what you gonna do? All right. We talked a little bit already about Ubuntu 24.10. Rob, do you know how to pronounce the code word for 24.10?
No. I don't remember what it is.
It's like oracular Oriole or something.
There you go. That's what it is.
I'm not sure what either of those words mean. I know one is an adjective and the other one is an animal, but that's about it.
Oracular Oreo. Okay, so for KDE fans like Jonathan or Snap fans like Ken, sorry, David, I've got nothing about Windows here. But for the other two, we've got some great news for you as Ubuntu is working to snap up KDE Plasma one day. Installing KDE may be as easy as snap install KDE. Way to go, Canonical. Snap up all the things. Okay, well, this time there is good reason for it. And that is for work on their immutable Ubuntu Core distro. And snaps, which they're using on their immutable distro, are allowing everything to be isolated and sandboxed from the Core OS, much like how Android functions today. So with the next release of Ubuntu being their 20-year anniversary, they have ambitions, but there's also a lot of nostalgia on the way. And I think we've talked about many of these old things coming back to be new again, like the Ubuntu Brown inspired elements, the original Ubuntu startup sound coming. And another cool feature that purists will hate. I guess I do have something for you, David. I do got something for you. Microsoft Intra ID authentication with Auth is being brought to Ubuntu 2404 LTS. Intra ID, for those who don't know, it's what Microsoft used to call Azure AD. This week, they're calling it Intra ID. So I believe this is going to allow users to log into Ubuntu with Microsoft Online accounts. This may not be much for the general home user because they're not going to have a Intra ID account, but I think this has a lot of potential to be huge in the enterprise and even medium, maybe some small businesses. As many companies are moving their on-premise infrastructure to the cloud, Intra ID or Azure AD or whatever you want to call it is their unified authentication method to manage users. I've seen quite a few people in the Windows world going there, and if Canonical or Ubuntu Linux wants to go along and be in that infrastructure, they got to support more than just the on-premise AD. This is probably the next great step. So on KDE.org's website, there is a PDF titled The Road to KDE Neon Core. I have no idea how that fit into this whole story of Ubuntu KDE, but apparently that must mean that the non-official Ubuntu desktop KDE Neon is also going to be adopting snaps for one of their distros. Will you?
This is interesting. So this makes me think that Ubuntu is trying to go to the atomic. They're trying to go the atomic direction with their primary release, and I guess snaps are great for that, right? It makes sense.
You got to remember, this is for Ubuntu Core, not Ubuntu.
Yeah, but all those snaps will still be available for regular Ubuntu. So even though regular Ubuntu won't be quote immutable, you could still run all those snaps.
They're still moving Ubuntu towards using snaps wherever they can.
Yeah,
I would make the argument that means, like, by definition, they are moving Ubuntu towards being an immutable desktop.
It's definitely going to be pretty close to it until they, the only thing missing will be that last immutable core piece.
Yeah.
Well, with the Ubuntu Core, it is an immutable version of Ubuntu where all the components are in snaps.
Well, I don't know if you've looked at your regular Ubuntu desktop lately, but it's getting close to being all of the
only 90%.
Yeah, that's interesting. They're putting as much of it in snaps. We will keep an eye on that one and see where it goes. I'm going to save my story to wrap with. So if David is ready, we're going to let him talk about hypervisor upgrades.
Sure.
All right.
So I've got a link to another Register article with another fun title. And it says, desktop hypervisors are like buses. None for ages and then 4 all at once. And for all of those of us living out in rural areas, we don't get to experience that. But in the city, you can be waiting for quite a while for a bus. And then finally, when one comes, all of them seem to come.
Yep.
But in September, they said 4 at once, but technically it's 2 different versions of VMware, so I kind of count that as 1. So I'll say 3. But VirtualBox has released 7.1, which has been billed as a major upgrade. It's got a UI modernization. It's got a basic and experienced user level. Used to be called expert mode. And I don't really think that the change in language is significant. They're just trying to, differentiate it a little bit better. Let's see. It also has added Linux and BSD code for ARM architecture, so it can run on modern Mac OS hosts. Another interesting thing, and I'm not sure that you would want to take advantage of this, but you can clone VMs from VirtualBox on the desktop directly into Oracle's cloud service. And then the desktop hypervisor will give you access and report on the resource usage of those cloudy VMs, which is kind of interesting. Parallels released an update. Parallels is primarily for Mac. It allows you, their big claim to fame is allowing you to run Windows on Mac. Although, interestingly, when I was looking into them a little bit, they also have a Windows on Chrome OS virtualizer. Don't know why you would want to run that, but if you have some need, it's out there. As far as I know, none of their products are free, so they don't qualify as open source, but they are a hypervisor. And then finally, VMware, which is definitely not free. Not open source. They do have some free versions. They've released.
Never mind. They do.
Yeah. Yeah. They've got free to use under special circumstances, but not open source. And I got my tongue tied there. They've come out with version 17.6 for their workstation and 13.6 for their Fusion product, which is basically the Fusion is the higher end of the workstation line, but they're both. Fusion is for Mac OS and workstation is for Windows. So they've released new versions of both of those. And somewhat related, because we're talking about hypervisors, I also have a link to a story down in the bottom of the show notes that I'm not going to dive into, but as part of the 6.12 Linux release, Microsoft is moving some Hyper-V code to boot Linux faster when you have a whole bunch of CPUs under Hyper-V. So all kinds of VM goodness going on out there.
Yeah.
You sure you don't want to go down that rabbit hole?
I'm sure.
That sounds like
we've chased enough rabbits already on this show.
A whole bunch of VMs I don't care about. There was no KVM there. I don't care.
KVM is all we need, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
When I interrupted, I was thinking about the ESXi. They used to have a free tier of that, and that's the Type 1, the one that you install in bare metal and runs in data centers and whatnot. They used to have a free tier for hobbyists to use at home, and they ended that. Can't remember if it was the beginning of this year, but yeah, they ended that free tier. And
they were like, hobbyists would never run a bare metal VM server.
And then I remember it was this summer when they brought Fusion and Workstation when they made them free. Those were not free before, or when they made free tiers. So yeah,
fun times.
So now we just need an OS to try on these virtual machines.
I take it you have one for us.
I've got a suggestion.
All right.
In fact, I got it from Saurav Rudra, Marius Nestor, and Bobby Borisov. They all thought the latest release of Zorin OS was worth writing about. Now, Saurav writes that along with turning 15 in July, Zorin OS 17.2 introduced a hybrid user experience with this latest release. Marius talks about this Ubuntu-based distribution targeting Windows users and Linux newcomers with the latest and greatest LibreOffice 24.8 Office Suite, as well as many other updated pre-installed apps. Bobby states Zorin OS 17.2 is backed with enhancements that promise to make your desktop experience smoother, faster, and more secure. They all inform us that Zorin OS 17.2, powered by the same Linux kernel version as Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, yes, I'm referring to version 6.8, brings updated drivers, enhanced security, and long-time support including receiving software updates and security patches until June 2027. Zorin OS also has built-in support for Flatpak, App Image, Rob, yes, and Snap packages if you want to install more applications. Also, Zorin Appearance. This is a customization tool that comes with a Zorin OS installation. Now it allows users to change the cursor theme and makes installing third-party themes easier. There's also a new section that's called Windows, not to be confused with the OS, which opens up a customization for application windows. It lets users change the behavior of window placement, title bars, and focus. As always, Saurav, Marius, and Bobby include in their article links to the latest changelog and instructions for upgrading from previous versions. Bobby even links to the Netherlands-based company Laptop with Linux, who offer to pre-install Zorin OS on their laptop.
Cool.
Might be a good item for Jeff to look into if he's still looking for a new laptop.
Yeah, interesting. Zorin has kind of made its name by being an easy transition for Windows and Mac users. I'm trying to figure out what the desktop environment is there. It almost looks like it's heavily. It almost looks like it's KDE that's been heavily fiddled with.
It does look like it. I actually had my hands on a Zorin machine this week, only briefly. Mm-hmm. But there was one in the shop that they couldn't get OBS Studio to work on it, and but yeah, it at a moment, there's computers all over the place, and at first glance, I actually thought it was just another Windows computer. It looked just like Windows, and then I saw the little Z in the bottom left corner. I'm like, wait a minute, hey, that's Zorin. Yep. I wasn't working; my guys were working on it, but I'm like, hey. That's Zorin, and I did sit down and try to work on it a little bit, but I ran out of time and they didn't get it figured out, so I don't know where the status is. But
I was going to ask.
It was the error was something about Qt something's plugin. I don't know.
Didn't have the correct version of Qt, probably.
Sounds like it. All right. It looks like they offer a KDE version, but I think their own is I don't know. Maybe
XFCE?
No, that's the light version. I think it's GNOME. I think it's GNOME by default. Yeah, looks like it is actually GNOME. They just make it look very not GNOME-ish.
I don't know why they just don't do KDE the way it looks.
Yeah. It seems like they're going for the KDE vibe.
Seems like it'd be so much easier especially with how GNOME's always changing things. It's gonna they're gonna pull the rug out from under him one of these days or something.
Is it GNOME or is it Cinnamon?
It's not Cinnamon.
Yeah, I think it's actually GNOME based on the internet article I found. All right, we have one more story that we want to cover, and this is something that we have been talking about for basically as long as we've been doing the show, and it's finally happened, and that is the real-time patches have finally been merged and should show up in Linux 6.12. And if you follow the link, there's a Twitter post, and it is the official moment at the real-time celebration, where Thomas Gleixner handed Linus Torvalds the official pull request, printed out on paper, wrapped in a gold ribbon, and Linus pulled the pull request. So it is official, and it is. It's been a long time coming. I've got a link here off to the ZDNet article talking about the literal 20 years of history of the real-time patches. And that digs into some of the reasons why someone might want to do it. If you're running live audio, then real-time could be helpful. Talking about how that it's deterministic and how long things take. Real-time Linux will not help your games run faster, but if you're trying to do actual live audio, it can help with that. It can help with Jack. Things like that. And then what's also interesting is all the things that have happened in the kernel because of the real-time patches, like mutexes and the ftrace tool. So very interesting stuff, but it is finally come in 6.12. So we'll give that a month or two to bake, and that will be out as a full release. And then a few weeks after that, it'll be available on some desktops, and we'll actually get to play with it. One of the things I'm not sure about is whether this can be turned on real time, whether you can go real time, or, is it a boot time argument, or is it a compile time setting? I'm not sure which of those it is. So once it actually comes out, I have to dig into that and find out. But it's here. It finally landed. We've been talking about it for a very long time.
I'm guessing that's compile time.
How long did it take?
20 years. The patches first got started about 20 years ago.
Wow.
Very long time.
I'm racking my head. I feel like there's a real-time joke in here somewhere, but I just can't come up with it.
Lots of
Probably
puns.
because it's of the delay.
Lots of puns. Not a real great joke, though. All right, let's talk about some command line tips. And what is Rasta Pasta Mapski? That's the Git. You have the GitHub link. It's the GitHub org is Rasta, or the GitHub users Rasta Pasta.
Rasta Pasta. Okay.
Rasta Pasta's Mapski.
Gotcha.
That's great.
I forgot about the person who made it, but the command line is Mapski, and so have you ever been in the terminal and maybe SSH somewhere or just on a TTY and needed a map?
No.
Well, me either. But this is still pretty cool.
Maybe once or twice, actually. Maybe once or twice.
Either way, Mapski, map, so it's MAPSCII. You hit enter and you have a nice map of the world. Now, this is not just for those watching. I do not have this over here. Okay, now for those watching, this is not just a static map. This is interactive. So I can navigate around with the arrow keys. I can use A and Z to zoom in and out. I'm zooming in here to A. Let's go to the US. Let's anyway, look at, you can get in there zoomed in pretty good. You can get all the way to the streets, but it's not all that visible. There's also, if you want to switch to block character mode, just click the C, and that's maybe a little more visual. And that's really about it. So let's see how far down we can go. And I even tried this on a TTY, so it does not need to be in any GUI mode at all. Look at this. I'm zooming in here, and you can see the streets and the rivers. And there's no street names there, but actually, there is street names. I have not zoomed in this far yet. So you can even drill all the way down into the street names. So you have a full SCII map right on the terminal.
So what's really fun about that is it actually has mouse support too.
Yes, it does. If you are in a console, obviously, if you're in a TTY, there's no mouse support there. But
yeah, fun. That's neat. I like that quite a bit. I wonder if it's just like taking Google Maps and rewriting it in characters, or if it's actually like crunching the numbers itself. Easiest way to play with it is telnet. You may have said this, but telnet mapski.me, or if you really want to, it's a Node.js thing. So you install it with npm, or you can get the snap if you really want to. And
guess what, Ken? I installed this with a snap.
Honestly, that's a lot easier than installing Node.js.
It was the easiest method I saw.
Yeah.
I suppose Telnet would have been easier, but for the live show. I didn't know necessarily how reliable that would be, so I installed it.
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. All right, I've got a command line tip for you. This is something that I have been working on this week, and it is GitHub runners. If you don't know, your organization, so this is a very geeky command line tip, but if you need it, you need it. If you're on GitHub, your organization has access to 20 GitHub hosted runners at a time. And that might not be enough for you, so you may want to run some of your own. But if you're in the situation I was in, you want GitHub, whenever you kick off a run, you want it to just pick whichever one is available. And so I got to looking at, well, how can I put my runners and the GitHub runners in the same pool and make it just pick whatever? And that is not an easy problem to solve until I came across this. And that is, when you kick off your runner, you can just give it the label Ubuntu-latest. And then GitHub will happily go and say, give me Ubuntu latest. And it will just pull either one of its or one of yours. And then if you want to specify a GitHub runner, you could then just give it the label of Ubuntu 22.04, because that's actually what Ubuntu latest is. And at some point in the future, of course, GitHub will change Ubuntu latest to, 24.04. And then you just have to go in and update those. But I was trying all kinds of things, because like you can give it like a list. So it's bracket label, comma, label, comma, label. And you can give it a list of labels, but GitHub will look for a runner that matches all of those labels. And there's no logic built in there to say, I want to use either this kind of runner or this kind of runner. It just doesn't exist. So you just kind of cheat and you label your runners as Ubuntu latest, and it just makes it happy. Everything works. So for anyone else out there, for all of one of you maybe that's listening that wants to be able to do that, you're welcome. I just saved you about 30 minutes of Googling. All right, David is up next.
Yes. I have a little command line, and that is glances. GLANCES. I've got a link to a how to use document that goes through it. It's probably not there by default, but it should be in all of the repos. And it's just another tool to let you monitor your system usage, and it can include CPU, swap, load, network, and disk I/O all in one app with a lot of different options, including running continuously so that you can refresh the display at a given interval. It defaults to 5 seconds, but you can set that. You can monitor a specific process along with other options, including exporting statistics to a CSV file. You can monitor I/O by disk name. You can monitor with a Docker plugin. You can monitor specific containers. So it's kind of interesting. It's just another option for monitoring performance on a system. Nothing too big.
Yeah, it's cool. It is yet another top program, essentially.
Pretty much, yep.
H-top, G-top, B-top, and glances. I like it, though. Very cool. All right, and I think that brings us to Ken. And I think we're talking about disks still. What do we have this week, Ken?
Yes, this week I am ending my series and managing disk drives and block devices with the command UDISKSCTL. I've been pronouncing it udisks control. And you'll see I've got two terminals up. In the bottom one, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the manual where it tells you that udisk control is the udisk command line tool. In the top one, I'm just going to enter udisk control by itself. And what it does is it basically gives you the help screen. You could also get this by typing udisk control space help. As you see, it shows, for those watching the video, you'll see it's got a list of commands. The first one is help, which shows this information. Now, if you pull up the man page for udisk control, you will see it is used by typing udisk control followed by one of the other commands you want it to carry out. I am going to demonstrate next using the udisk control to display the status. That gives you a high level status of all your block devices. Right now, you'll see I've only got 2 devices hooked up. That's going to change in a minute as I hook these up. Now, I'm going to go ahead and come down to the bottom one real quick and exit out, because one command that you can use is monitor. That's udisk control space monitor. And that will have you monitoring your udisk daemon. And watch the bottom screen as I hook these devices up. For those that are watching, for those that are listening,
for those listening, this would be a good time to go and get a cup of coffee and come back after he gets done plugging them in.
yes. And I've got them both plugged in. As those of y'all watching saw, that the bottom terminal updated with status as they were read. Quite a bit of information scrolled by there, didn't it?
Yeah.
And if we go back to the top terminal and repeat the udisk control status, you'll see that we've got 2 more devices listed in the table. Now, the table I'm talking about has 4 columns. The first one's the model column. It gives you the model number of the device. The second column is the revision. The third column gives you the serial or serial number. The last column gives you the device location. And by device, I do mean /device/. For example, the second row in the column is for my internal Seagate hard drive. That's SDA. And then for those of y'all listening, the table also just added the 2 external drives that I hooked up. One's the Western Digital MyPass that I've been showing previously. This time it was hooked up as SDB. And then I've got a Seagate backup slim 2 terabyte drive that was hooked up for SDC. And where that comes in is if you want to get more info about a particular one, you would type in udisk control space info space either -- block device. I'm lazy, so I'm going to go with -B. And then /dev /SDB today for the Western Digital device. And that gives you another over a screen full of information. And if you go up, you'll see that it's got the configuration, a lot of fields that it gives out, whether or not the device, here again, it actually gives the full device descriptor. In other words, /dev /SDB. It even gives what the drive's called. The full drive is /org /free desktop /udisk2 /drives / a combination of the drive's model number and serial number. You look back up here, you'll see that there's the model number and there's the serial number. Any spaces in the model number would be replaced with an underscore, and you'd also have an underscore between where the model number ends and the serial number. So it gives you an idea of how you can come up with the model number or the drive name yourself. Another interesting bit of information it gives is symlinks to it. Here it's still using and Jeff. You may remember going over this back when you went over the Linux file system, but it's got /dev /disk / either disk sequence, ID, or path. And you'll see it's got the information for those. And then it's got user space mount options and any partitions that are listed on it. Now for the user space mount options, currently it's blank. Another command you can use with UDISC control is mount. That's MOUNT. And when you
Live demo gone wrong. SDB is not a mountable file system.
It is not. I want SDB1, the first partition on it.
Mm-hmm.
And there it goes and mounts it and displays all the information to include the mount point. As well as the name.
Very cool.
And if you were watching the video, you'd also see that the monitor that I still have running went through. Find out where it added it there. Added SDB. That's what I plugged it in. Here's where it added the SDB1.
Yeah, lots of info in there.
And of course, in addition to mounting, actually, I still have to mount it. I did the info for the SDB1.
You can also unmount it if it is mounted.
Yes. We'll go ahead and mount it. When it is mounted, it gives you mounted at the device block ID and then the file system path that it's going to use. And when it is mounted, you can unmount it, and it gives you unmounted. What's really nice is you can use a -O along with the options that you would use in the file system table for mounting, such as read-only. So that's mounted as read-only. And just to prove it, quicker for me to type it.
Try to touch something on it, yeah. So I've got a question for you. You're not running this as root, and yet it let you mount the drive. How did it let you mount the drive without running as root?
Because it lets the user status, assuming the user has the capability to mount.
Ah, interesting. I figured the answer was going to be that it had to be in your FS tab.
No.
Ah.
Because this particular device is not in my file system table.
Huh. Cool.
But it actually explains that in more detail in the manual.
Mm-hmm. And it did indeed mount it read-only. Very cool.
Ken, you just taught me something I did not ever know. What FS tab stands for.
The file system table.
I never put that together. I never thought about it. Just FS tab. I just never thought about what that means.
Furthering
file system table.
Here on the ULS, furthering education since like 2020 or whenever it was.
And if you noticed, I just did I listed the directory that it's mounted to, and it's showing that everything that's on there is actually tied to root.
Huh.
So
Very
this
cool.
is an easy way for if you've got an external drive that you just want to mount read-only without having to go into the file system table and edit it.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it that way.
Yep. Very cool. All right, those are our tips. We have had a blast. We have celebrated some stuff going into Linux, and I think it is time to let the guys get the last word if they want to. We will let David go first. Anything you want to plug? Any last words to get?
Nothing to plug. I do have a last word in honor of Jeff and WireGuard. I went to Copilot while we were talking and asked for a haiku, and here is what it gave me.
Oh boy.
Silent packets flow, secure tunnels weave through night, data's safe in flight.
That's surprisingly not bad.
Exactly. That was my thought.
Yep. Ken, I see you've got a note here.
Yes, I do. And I just want to mention that Marius has an article about the GNU Linux-Libre project downstream release of the GNU Linux-Libre 6.11 kernel, which introduces detection of firmware loading primitives in Rust among several other additions. And it's going to be great if you want to build a 100% free computer that doesn't include any proprietary code. Then definitely read Marius's article.
Gotcha. All right. And Robert.
List units, start, stop, enable and disable, goodbye to init. There's a haiku. I looked that up way at the beginning of the show, and I've just had that here waiting. So,
dual
besides
haikus.
that, yeah, Ken, where's your haiku? Anyway, come find me. Connect. RobertPCampbell.com. I've had some new connections made recently. Dr. Frankenstein donated a coffee to me. At least that's what he called himself on the coffee page right here. And anyway, when you get to my website, you too can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Mastodon, which is between, like I said before, Mastodon and LinkedIn are probably my most active locations. And if you want, you can also donate coffees to me. And, you know, I have a new driver in the house this summer, and a teenage driver who now has been using one of our 2 cars for the household, which means I've often been without a car, and means I need to buy a new car, which means lots of coffees will go a long way for a new car.
Oh, what fun. All right. And the things I want to mention, of course, you can find more of my work at Hackaday. That's where Floss Weekly is at. This past week, we talked about JBang, which is Java as a system scripting language. Super interesting. Had Jeff Massey there with us, and we had a lot of fun with Jeff and Max. And yeah, you should go check it out. The security column goes live every Friday morning at Hackaday as well. And we sure appreciate everybody that goes over and supports us there. Thank you to everyone that has been here, both live and on the download for the Untitled Linux Show. And we will see you next week. You really enjoy the show and just wish you could somehow be plugged in for more? Would you like to be able to get ad-free versions of everything or join the Discord? Well, you need to check out the club. It's Club TWiT. Find out more at twit.tv/clubtwit. For about the price of a cup of coffee per month, you too can join the club. And you should.